Okay, and as I said earlier, this week's episode of the Grumpy Collector podcast is really all about this presentation that I've been working on and off for over a year now. Um, and I call it Hidden Gems Modern Day Limited Edition JLC Watches. You can see the picture on this title slide was some of the books I used for research, which was JLC catalogs over the last 20 or so years. From an agenda standpoint, what this presentation really covers is a timeline of the Maison. What does modern day mean with regard to JLC? What constitutes a limited edition series? And then let's review in detail all of the limited edition watches. When I originally first set out to do this, I thought, I'll cover all the neo vintage watches that JLC has done to the present. And honestly, it's just too many. It would take up several hours, and frankly, I'm not done with my research either. So this is really from neo vintage, which we'll get into what that timeline really means, up through about 2005 ish. But first, I haven't been saying it by design, but how do you pronounce the watch brand JLC? And you can see a bunch of different phonetic spellings I've put here. I remember this really funny video on YouTube, and the guy keeps calling it the brand Jaeger-LeCoultre or Jaeger-LeCoultre. I've heard Jaeger or Jaeger, Jaeger-LeCoultre, 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 Jaeger-LeCoultre. Well, what's interesting when you think about JLC is that, the first name is, looks like Jaeger, like Jägermeister, right? That's very much a German name, but in French it is pronounced Jaeger. And then the second part, and again, JLC being a Swiss company, they're more in the French side of Switzerland. So that's why you would probably most commonly hear it referred to as Jaeger. And then the last part, if you talk to old collectors, they'll call it LeCoultre. But really today, most people pronounce it like the French would, which is LeCoultre. So that last bullet really is the correct pronunciation from a French-speaking side. Jaeger-LeCoultre. Jaeger-LeCoultre. Old collectors will say Jaeger-LeCoultre. Honestly, anytime I've walked into a retailer that sells JLC or a boutique, they're not going to care how you pronounce it. I think they're extremely gracious about that. And funny enough, I actually think this is something that's hurt the brand for a while, because a lot of people maybe don't want to own a watch that then someone asks them, hey, what watch is that? That's awesome. If it's a Reverso or something, people could say, wow, that's really cool. And the person feels kind of self-conscious because they don't even know how to pronounce the watch brand. I think it's hurt them. Famously, when Hans Wilsdorf created Rolex was just a name he picked out that, because it could be pronounced easily by people all over the world. No one mispronounces Rolex, right? Sometimes people, mispronounce, is it Patek Philippe, or, instead of Patek, is it, I can't even say the other one, Patek or Patek Philippe. Patek or Patek, I don't know. Patek Philippe. Anyways, so with JLC and with how you're hearing me say it throughout this presentation, it really is Jaeger-LeCoultre. A brief history. You can read this slide. I don't need to read it even for this presentation. What I do want to call out there are their two taglines they've used in marketing over the last maybe 20, 30 years. Some people refer to JLC watches is the watchmaker's watchmaker, or the watchmaker's watch. And then they also had this slogan, which I really love, very kind of in your face and ballsy, but they also have the slogan, "Have you ever worn a real watch?" Which I just love because I am a huge Jaeger-LeCoultre fanboy. Um, Interesting. You can see the timeline here. What's I think so interesting is, and I think a lot of people forget is, and of course it's obviously two people's names kind of put together, the Coultre family, and then another guy with Jaeger in his name, and they kind of joined forces. But in 1937, this Paris-based group is really where it kind of created Jaeger-LeCoultre, and it merged with Vacheron Constantin. And back then it was just called Vacheron and Constantin. Interesting that they kind of got rid of the and symbol after some time. And then in 1969, the Saphir group sold it to the Favre from, what is it, Loeb Favre, Favre Loeb, the dive watches. And so, the Favre Luba, this brought JLC together with that group. And then a portion of JLC was sold off to Video Automotive, which I always thought was pretty interesting. And then, there was all this different confusion because, if you look at vintage cars, you'll see Jaeger on some of the dash instruments. And it was kind of the same, kind of the not different company. Eventually, those all got put together in about 1981. And I think something that is forgotten is in 1986, Audemars Piguet purchased 40% of this kind of Saphir group, which was the watchmaking group from Video. Video reorganized their watch operations and kind of formed this group called LMH. And then Video was acquired by the Mannesmann Group, which was a huge industrial company in Germany. Did a lot of, my understanding is they were a big manufacturer, almost like GE. They did a lot of things, but predominantly known for manufacturing pipe. I think, maybe metal or lead pipe. And they were also the owner of the non-horological parts of Jaeger. So it was kind of nice that all kind of got put together. And then Vodafone, of all things, what is that, a British phone company, bought, acquires this Mannesmann Group, and then immediately, because they wanted some technical IP that they had at the time, and of course they did. Vodafone did not want to be in the watch business, so they immediately put up Video for sale, and Richemont agrees to purchase 40% of JLC, because that piece, remember that Audemars Piguet bought in 1986? Well, in 1999, Richemont buys it from Audemars Piguet for $280 million. There's a couple things that's important to note here is, when Vodafone put up Video for sale, it really was, there was a lot of interest from a lot of different people. And Richemont was smart enough to see, okay, well, who owned all the different parts? And they saw that Audemars Piguet still owned 40%. So they kind of went around and bought the 40% of Video, which really was JLC, right? Bought it from Audemars Piguet, and that immediately put them in the driver's seat for negotiations to buy the rest of the company. It was a really good tactical move, if you ask me, and frankly, very strategic too, because it probably helped save some money for them. And then they acquired LMH for 2.8 billion Swiss francs from Vodafone. And that really brought a lot of brands, not just JLC, under the Richemont umbrella. And this was in 2000. Just brief history. There's a lot more, obviously, especially if you go way back into the 1800s, because the company does have a long history, especially with micro machining and making small machines for things like the watch industry. But for today's talk too, it's important to think about what does a modern day mean with regard to Jaeger-LeCoultre watches and limited editions. And for me, I was really trying to think about where's the perfect kind of first bookend to start this talk with. Um, by 1990, the resurgence and interest in mechanical watches was starting to come back slowly. Think post quartz crisis, or if you're in Japan, it was maybe a quartz revolution, right? Kind of depends on which side of history you're on. Um, the other thing I'll say is, while JLC was obviously around making watches in the 70s and 80s, etc., some of the earlier watches they were doing, though, during this time, and some of their quartz watches were really fairly forgettable. So, in my mind, early 90s is really where this kind of starts. And that's really where I think a lot of people also feel with other watch brands, where this term of neo vintage comes into place. You think of vintage watches. I've talked about this some in other talks I've done. What's the difference between vintage and antique and retro? But for most people, vintage watches may be those really earlier watches from 1920s, 1930s, 40s, maybe even 50s, right? We can consider all those, maybe even 60s. Those are kind of vintage watches. So I like to think of neo vintage as watches kind of starting in the early 1990s and then going to maybe just around, early 2000s, maybe 2005, 2006, 2008. And I think kind of at that point, you're just kind of in the neo, right? You're just kind of in the current. So interestingly, the picture that I posted here of this JLC Memovox, this actually was a limited edition, but again, it's not. This is an earlier one, and I don't want to say it's forgettable, but it's nothing really special. It looks very, it looks identical to a Memovox they would have made in the 1960s. So it's not, doesn't bear to talk a whole lot about some of their earlier watches. And you'll notice too, and think about like ownership wise and stuff. 1990, there was some different infusions of cash. Ownership's moving around a little bit with the parent that's owning JLC, and I think that really helped usher in some of this. The other thing worth noting is, what do we even mean when we say limited series or limited edition? I like to think what a limited edition is. The watch was released, to the public, typically with a stated limit of production pieces made. I'm not including one of one because you have things like only watch. I don't think that's super relevant here. And then I'm not including what I'd call trivial releases, where the only difference is maybe an engraving on the case back. I will say, if you noticed earlier, it was not a neo vintage, but I just think it's so cool. The Don Draper, Mad Men limited edition Reverso. That's a cool watch. And I think it's what a great watch could kind of talk about that helps ease us into this period is the Master Grand, Reveal. If you look at this watch, you see all these weird appendages on the case. I love that it has 3 crowns. I mean, look, it has 4 hands coming out of the center stack. It has another 4 hands in 4 different subdials. It has a moon phase. This is really a tour de force. But, and look at the years when this was made, 89 to 95, and they made 250 in platinum, 250 in pink gold. But when you look at this, to me, this is still very much old school Jaeger-LeCoultre. And don't get me wrong, this is still a fantastic watch. Perpetual calendar, chiming alarm, moon phase, 24-hour dial, automatic winding. This is a very thick watch. And that's why you're seeing all these crowns is, this is really like a perpetual calendar that then they bolted on a Memovox mechanical alarm to. And so you have one crown just for, winding that mechanical alarm, which is, then set with the crown, and that's what that big red arrow hand is. That's for the alarm function. And don't forget, in the top right around 1 o'clock, you'll see there's even a 2-digit for the year. Uh, has a bronze alloy for the gong, so it makes a really nice sound. 41 millimeters. Again, pretty compact from a width standpoint, but it is thick. And this caliber, 350 parts, and you can see the prices here. Initially 30,500 in platinum, almost 23,000 in pink gold. And think about, and that is back in 1989, 1995. To put that in today's money, you'd almost have to double that. But what's interesting is you can find this watch for, the same or less than what it originally sold for, which really means it really is quite a bargain. But again, this still has a lot of the older JLC DNA, especially when you look at the indices and kind of that stepped case. It's still a gorgeous watch, but there's just a lot going on. To me, where really things get interesting, and I think is still one of the most beautiful watches that Jaeger-LeCoultre has done, is in 1991. They brought out the 60th anniversary Reverso, limited edition of 500. And just look at the dial on this. Look at the guilloche work. And, there's a lot of things here. This was the first Reverso with a complication other than date. There's that power reserve up there in the top left. So cool. Kind of partially covers up the 10 and the 11. I just love that. Has a pointer date instead of a date window, which I think is really cool. What's really neat about how they did the pointer date is that little gold hand coming out of the center stalk. But as you follow the number down, look, it goes, 12, 13, and then notice 13 is repeated again above the sub-seconds. And then you have 15, 17, right? Because it's doing odd numbers, and it jumps back down to 18, 19, and then it skips again, and then it kind of gets skewed up. See how it goes from 29 to 31, and then one shoots back up at the top. I don't know. I just think it's precious. Really pretty movement in this that you can see there in the bottom. Again, this was limited edition. This was the first time them using that new grand tail case. So the dimensions are 42 millimeters tall, 26 millimeters wide, caliber 824, 193 parts. I think this watch is just beautiful. And what's even more amazing, and again, this is also, it's probably worth pointing out, this is in a really pretty pink gold case. But this was the first of a 6-watch series that JLC did to kind of, I don't want to say, 60th anniversary, because that's what this watch is for, but it was really a start of a multi-year effort to really rejuvenate the Reverso and rejuvenate Jaeger-LeCoultre in the process. And I think these have been lost a little bit to history, but I think they absolutely did that. And today, I think for the money, these are just some of the best watches you can buy. And that's, to me, why this whole theme of this presentation is around hidden gems. Because I think a lot of people in the watch world always are kind of looking at the next novelty, the next product offering, and they kind of lose sight of, what's been done in the past and maybe trying to hunt those down. I think this is just a gorgeous watch and a great example of that. Well, how did they follow this up? Well, in 1993, they brought out the second in this series, and this time it's the first Reverso with a tourbillon. And look at the display back on this. You see the time. It has the sub-seconds on the main dial. Beautiful guilloche work. I love that it just says tourbillon, but there's no cutout in the dial to show you that. Kind of reminds me of the older Patek Philippe's that were similar. But then you flip it over, and you have this great, nice display back where you can see that big tourbillon. There's also a power reserve, which I love. And then what I think is so endearing is the cutout on the bottom of the case, so you can see all of that tourbillon that you're paying for. Again, limited series of 500, 1993, and the original price on this was $40,000. And again, you can find this watch today for far less than that original issue price. In 1994, they came out with, these are all firsts. Now you have the first reverso with a minute repeater. And look at the slide, how they did that. So it's not sticking out like some flange like you see on a lot of minute repeaters. Here it has these nice scallop ridges, but it doesn't really jet out from the case. But you can see how you would slide it down to initiate it. It's a 2-gong mechanism. And then in the bottom right of the dial, right around 5 o'clock, that's where you can see the spinning governor cut out on the dial. And again, these are all 18 karat pink gold. This one, the minute repeater had a solid case back to help with the sound. And, again, these are all being done in that Grand Tal case size, that 26 millimeters wide, 42 millimeters tall. And this one's only 9.8 millimeters thick. Just amazing. And then there's a great video here from Watchbox with showing this in action. Check this out. Let's see if we can get this to work. Yeah. Look at that governor spinning there. And how great does that sound? I love that. So cool. And again, that governor is just to kind of help slow down the mechanism a bit. So, you had that beautiful 60th anniversary with the large power reserve indicator. Then you followed up with a tourbillon and then a minute repeater. It's kind of like, where do you go from here? Next, in 1996, they came out with first reverso with a chronograph. Again, series of 500. And you can see the buttons there for the chronograph. But what's great is, the front, check it out. It's just hours, minutes, and date. And then you flip it over to the back, and that's where the chronograph is, which I just think is so beautiful. And that big dial is the 60 seconds, and then the bottom is retrograde 30-minute counter. Now, feel free to debate me on the usefulness of a chronograph that can only count up to 30 minutes. I'm not saying you're wrong if you feel that way, but I still think this is a beautiful way to do it. And they skeletonize the dial on the back so you can see some of the movement as you articulate the pushers. But then, you don't have this with other watches, but because this is a reverso, you could start the chronograph, but then flip it back over, and maybe the owner, the wearer, doesn't know if the chronograph is running or not. And so they put an indicator on the bottom right, and that's what that little paddle flips from. So when it's running, it shows it's running, and then if it's stopped, it'll show it stopped there. Of course, it's in French. I think that is so cool because that way I could flip it back over, and I still know if my chronograph is running or not. Just things you don't necessarily think about with normal watches. Again, this was $29,000 on strap. I think it's interesting to see that it's a $10,000 premium for the pink gold bracelet for this watch. It's like a third more just for the bracelet. I think this is a gorgeous watch. Again, you can get this for far less today. A real bargain. After the chronograph from 96, in 1998, you have this where you have the very traditional front side where you have your hours, minutes. There's a beautiful day-night indicator, and you have seconds, sub-seconds at 6 o'clock. and then you flip it over and you have these beautiful Art Nouveau or Belle Epic numerals. I just love how they're written here. And this is showing you, a plus minus, how many hours of GMT display, which is super cool. Another day night indicator and a 24-hour city display for this second time zone that's on the back. And then it's actuated with the pusher there to advance. Just really cool. And as you advance one, like the other kind of spins the other way with the GMT plus minus. So this Reverso Geographique from 1998, that's exactly how that worked. And this is really, to me, I think also the first time you're seeing a Reverso with that kind of white and black dial. And then can you top this when you think about this initial limited edition that was going to be a 6-watch set? And they wrapped it up with a perpetual calendar. And you can see here, beautifully executed, 276 parts. Again, this is only 10 millimeters thick. A lot different than that first perpetual calendar we saw, the Grand Reveal. Here, hours, minutes, you have that day-night indicator in the top right. In the bottom, you can see the leap year indicator and the subseconds, both at 6 o'clock, but super clean. And then if you flip it back, that's where you see the retrograde date. That's where you see the moon phase. And that's where you see day of the week and month. So clean, in my opinion. Just really love how this is executed. And you still have this beautiful guilloche work on both dials. Just stunning. And as I like to joke with these 6 watches, and I think it's important to note too, and I think this is why it's so important to have reference materials when you can, because when you look at the Jaeger-LeCoultre catalogs from 1991 to 2000, this is a 9-year span. Several of these limited edition watches, because remember, these are limited editions of 500, they show up for 5 or more years in the catalogs. It's not like today in the watch world where you do a limited edition series and it sells out in a month. It took JLC years to sell these limited series or edition of watches. This perpetual calendar, the chronograph, the geophysique, these were geographic, these were around for years. It took them a long time to sell some of these. Also, which I think is really great, and you can see on the bottom left, I wanted to show you what did the box look like that these came in. Beautiful burl wood box. But then if someone had been buying these throughout the time, they even created this set where you could store all 6, and it came with a magnifying glass. I'm really wondering too, like at the end, did they still have some from the very beginning? And did they sell these with all 6 in it? Or was this just a box you could get after the fact for collectors who'd been kind of buying and shopping all along? That's a mystery for me, but super interesting to think about maybe how these complete sets kind of navigated around. So this was a huge part of what JLC was doing, again, for about 9 years. But during that time, there was some other limited editions that were going on, which I think is interesting. This first one is kind of what I call maybe one of the original Art Deco watches. This is a limited series of 120, 1992. I believe this was a JDM, Japanese domestic market release. I love how when you look at Reversos today, especially let's say if you look at like a duo, on one side you'll have the numbers kind of in the box, and then subseconds will be a box. And if you flip it over to the other side for the other time zone, it's round with the numbers, and then the subseconds is round because it's keeping it in sync, squares and circles. I think this is so interesting that it mixes that up, and you have the circle that the hands are going to spin around, and you have kind of the numbers, not quite in a square, but not quite in a circle either. So you have a little bit of negative space, right? I mean, look at the space to the right of the 5 or the left of the 7 or the right of the 1. It's just very interesting. And then you have the seconds, though, in that square. Just a fun play on shapes. Obviously no loom or anything like this. And it's the caliber 822, a pretty standard movement. And then from 1992 all the way to 2001, so this is a long time. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to include these or not, but I figured it might be, I might as well, which is another kind of Art Deco. And the Art Deco really comes to the dials, where you see this beautiful guilloche. Again, see that kind of circle and rectangular motif. But these all had skeletonized movements. What I think is really interesting that's worth calling out to is a normal reversal like that previous one and others where they have just, time in subseconds. They have 116 parts. These skeletonized movements in the back with that display back have 134 parts because of the skeletonization. The skeletonization adds to the part count. It's another 18 parts that kind of come out of it because they're kind of chopping up all the bridges and the body of the movement. And I'm showing here for you what it looked like in white gold with this really pretty salmon dial. And then there was pink gold with kind of a white frosted dial. These are pretty thin, really pretty. And here's just a close-up. I just think, and they've done a couple different versions. So I'm also showing kind of a more modern one that they still kind of consider the Art Deco. That has some of that skeletonization. But you can see the original one on the left with the subseconds. And then in 1995, this is kind of the first time you'll see a limited edition where they're really starting to go into doing the miniature painting. They've always done this with as one-offs, or you can get your initials done on a case back. But I thought this was really cool that they did a 4-watch set of the 4 seasons, very limited. This is 25, right? And the paintings on the case back are by Alphonse Muha, the very famous Czech Art Nouveau painter. And interesting, the enamel artwork was actually done by Miklos Marcel, great Hungarian name, who worked at JLC and was really known for his artistry. And so, it's interesting to see the stuff that he did, because really it's one great craftsperson and artist having to, interpret another artist and knowing the materials, and how do you take a large work and shrink it down but still keep all of that in there. And this makes all the sense in the world that it comes with a magnifying glass. You can really appreciate the detail that's in these. I don't know if these were ever sold individually. I would think so. I don't think you had to buy them all as a complete set here. But if you did, again, got a free wood box. And then in 1999, another Muha paintings. The original paintings were done in 1899. Here's 1999. So I think that's pretty neat. 100 years into the future. Again, this was a limited series of 25. Again, I love the Art Nouveau numbers on the dial, on the front of the dial, and then the minute track, that's the square, and then the sub-second track, the round, that's in blue. I just think that stands so great with that really pretty white enamel dial. And then, of course, you have the enamel work on the back. And, this was 2 different watches. And you had one for dawn, kind of waking up. And then you have dusk of, the sun setting and going to sleep. And you can see here, and these are Muha's words, dusk, shivering woman covering herself at the close of the day illustrates mankind's fears and hesitations in the face of an unknown future. Um, Pretty deep to have on the back of a Reverso, and the artistry is just really second to none with these. Um, and I know this talk is just about neo vintage, but I had to put a slide in here to just talk about the update in 2018 where JLC reinterpreted again, um, Alphonse Muha's work. And what's interesting is this was kind of a 3-watch set, and they did summer, spring, and autumn, but not winter. I don't know why. My understanding is it was just these 3 watches. I hope I'm wrong because that just seems so crazy to me. But what I think is really, really interesting with this is you have the guilloche work on the front of the dials, and then they're covered in doing enamel. So this is kind of the one of the few times you're seeing enamel work on top of guilloche for the dials. And then on the back, see how you can see the progression of JLC, whereas before they were just doing kind of that standard box, cutting out and then doing the enamel, depiction or painting there. And here now you have all of this really pretty hand engraving, and then they're doing the enamel work on top of it and firing it. And my understanding was, if they messed up the painting, this engraving work was already done, and you just kind of had to pitch it and redo it. So you feel bad for the engravers, but you probably even feel worse for the people having to do the enamel work and making sure that they got done right the first time, or otherwise they were creating more work for their friends. In keeping with this series, and this is the only one where I'm jumping to the future, I just wanted to kind of close the book on the Four Seasons stuff that JLC's recently done. But that's with watches. I think it's worth calling out just a few of the Atmos clocks that were being done around this time. So in 1999, they did a beautiful series of 25 of these, again, celebrating the Four Seasons. And the marquetry on this is just out of this world. I mean, look at the panels that you open up on the left and right of this clock. Just gorgeous. You can see in the notes here, the marquetry has 2,000 parts, 100 different species of wood used. These were not inexpensive at all. $57,000 in 1999. Just think about that. For that same price, you could have bought, the minute repeater Reverso, right? And the craftsman who was doing this, a French craftsman, spent 2 years to do the work for the 25 clocks. So really something else. Related to that, also in 1999, another limited edition of 25 is another Atmos clock. But here, look at the dial, so much more complicated, because in this case, you're seeing where it's the year indicator, but it's for 1,000 years, which is pretty hard to kind of wrap your head around, if you ask me. And you can see what I wrote here. As a significant record in the Atmos history, Jaeger-LeCoultre recorded all the names of the owners of these clocks written down on parchment. These names are stored in a sealed spherical glass container at JLC HQ somewhere. Maybe it's in their museum. This container, is now in the private collection of, Jaeger-LeCoultre. Makes sense, right? In Switzerland. Again, not a cheap clock. Again, really pretty marquetry, wood marquetry, really showing the different, I love the idea of having different craftspeople and different crafts, like riffing on each other and, just piling it up, right? Because you have the art of watchmaking, you have the cabinetry, the marquetry, the idea of art that's being reinterpreted here too. Just so cool. And with this case too, it's worth noting on the top, check out that beveled glass as well. So I think it's great. It lets light kind of come in to the clock from the front and the top. And here's a zoomed in picture of this clock. So you can see the years, that track, and it kind of spirals several times around almost like a snail shell. And it starts at 2,000 and ends at 3,000. So really, it can track 1,000 years. And, that just helps you think long term, right? To think about any of us, maybe if we're lucky, gets to span 100 years on this clock. And that's not all that far. That's just 1/4 of one rotation for that hand. Maybe it's just a good reminder of how maybe fleeting life can be. And then you can see the cutout again for the months there, and then there is a moon phase at 6 o'clock. Really neat to see complications with Atmos. You don't typically see that a whole lot. And then you can see when you open up the drawer, you can see those cylinders. And at first you may think, oh, is this like a humidor? Like, what is this? It's like, no, this is, those are tubes for parchment where you could write down, important things happening. There's a little quill pen and ink and, the whole 9 yards. I really do think, and you can see it's a little bit Asian inspired with the idea of writing on parchment and writing with special ink. That I really do think these clocks, these 25 clocks were really geared towards the Asian market. And what I'm not showing as well, which is pretty cool, is these clocks came in a really, I'm all about boxes apparently, came in a really exceptional box. Look at the box that this came in. I mean, this is something else. And again, at the bottom of the clock itself, you have that drawer with those 10 lacquered, engraved tubes, each containing parchment. And the idea, again, thinking long term, right, was, write down the significant family events, and you have one tube for every 100 years. One tube to write down what happened this century. Think about doing that in your parchment for your one tube and knowing there's 9 more tubes, and 9 more parchment for the next 900 years for your family. What a way to think about time. So cool. You don't traditionally see these come up for auction a whole lot either, especially together with the original box. But I think these are really, really cool. And then in 2002, maybe finishing up a little bit of the enamel stuff, you can see again, great like Art Nouveau numbers here. This was again a limited set of 25. And again, this is something where I think it's so interesting that I have not been able to find a single auction record for either of these two watches come up. And so the pictures you're seeing here are actually scans I had to take from an old JLC catalog from 2002. So I don't know if they actually ever made these. Did they actually make all 25 sets? Because they were sold only as a set. I don't know, but really, really pretty. I love the design. I love the blue. Yeah, gorgeous JLCs, and definitely a rare one. Okay, now going back to the 90s for a little bit. We've talked a lot about Reverso, but now it's also important to talk a little bit about what else was going on with JLC and their limited editions. And something they did, which I think makes a lot of sense, and you still see this today with JLC, is that they will do certain dial colors with certain case metals. And that way, there's no question when you're looking at a watch, is that steel, or is that white gold, or is that platinum? You can just tell immediately by the dial. And in this case, what you're seeing here is a wonderful perpetual calendar, limited edition of 250. You'll notice it had a case back, but hinged open. Some people call this a hunter case, or maybe an observatory, or case back with some writing on it. But you could hinge that open, and then don't worry, you don't have to worry about messing with the movement because there's still sapphire crystal there, automatic winding. this is pretty small, 37 millimeters. And what I love about this, I love perpetual calendars, and I love the different ways that manufacturers try to show everything. How do they resolve things? Um, and there was a lot of, I don't want to say problems with earlier perpetual calendars. However, as an owner, and actually, I think, again, this is great, that it requires some intelligence to know when you should be messing around with your perpetual calendar and maybe when you shouldn't be. And JLC decided to help owners with this. And so look at that little arch cutout right above the handset. And right now it just shows as white, but it would turn red, to tell you, don't mess with your perpetual calendar. Now's not the time, right? Maybe you shouldn't be moving the time forwards or backwards or advancing things, because maybe a lot of things are about to switch over. Maybe it's at the end of the month or at the end of the day, whatever, right? Just like with any watch, if you're messing with the date, you probably should do it at, you know, um, 6 a.m. or 6 p.m., not at midnight or not at noon, because you don't really know sometimes which it is. So I love that they did this cutout. And what I love even more, if the cutout's not enough, check out the hour and minute hands. And what do you notice there? They did cutouts on the hands. So even if they're both pointing up at noon or midnight, you'll still be able to see that indicator, because at that point, obviously, it'd be showing red because it's saying, don't mess with your watch. Then I love that. Um, and then, of course, you'll see all these really pretty arrow indices, except for at 6 o'clock where there is the number six. Nowhere else do you have an Arabic numeral. Um, really, really love this watch. And again, these limited editions that you're going to be seeing, most of these are platinum. And again, because of that, they had this special um, dial as well. 1997. Here's again limited edition 250, but here's the Master Geographique. Again, you have that same hinged case back, super cool, platinum. Power reserve, that big reserve de marche at the left. You have the city crown at 10 o'clock that adjusts the cities down below. And you also have that little round circle at 9 o'clock on the kind of sub dial for a day and night indicator. Really pretty. I really like the flatness of the bezel with this, and how those kind of arrow indices are, and then just the cutout for the cities. I think this is a really neat way to do a world timer. 1999. Here's the Master Moon. You can see, again, this is an annual calendar with a pointer date, moon phase, so it's not a perpetual calendar. Still 37 millimeters, 36 joules. And you'll notice with this one, again, you have that hinged case back, automatic winding, as most of these are. Just really sharp. And you can see how the 1 is at 12, but 31 is just a little bit to the left of that. Some watches you'll see where the 1's a little bit off to the right. I always just think that's interesting to see how that's executed. Really, really clean watch. Also at this time, then you have the Master Reserve de Marche or de Marche. Again, big power reserve, right there between 10 and 11 o'clock. Sub-seconds, just really pretty. And then you have the date on the right sub down, again, hinge case back. 2001, they brought out the ultra thin in platinum, again, limited edition of 250. This is a small watch though, 34 millimeters wide. You won't catch me wearing one of these. Way too small for my wrist, but it is amazing that it's a 5.8 millimeter thick. Because there isn't a seconds hand or a sub-seconds dial, they could really keep things super thin with this. This caliber 849, this is a wonderful movement. 19 joule. Again, it's just time only. Also in 2001, now you have the Master Grand Memovox. And think about this. Does this look familiar? Think about the very first watch we covered, that grand reveal. This is the, the child of that. This is this showing what has, you know, JLC done in over a decade, and look how they've modernized it. You don't have three big crowns, appendages sticking out of the case, right? It's so much more cleaned up. Again, you still have the red arrow. Right now, it's pointing at 9 o'clock. That's for the alarm function. You're still winding it with that crown at 2 o'clock, but it's just much cleaner. I think we can all agree. And it's been sized up a bit. Now it's 41.5 millimeters, 15.5 millimeters thick. Yeah, great evolution. It'd be fun to see these two watches kind of side by side. And this is using the caliber 909. It's not that the movements are probably all that different fundamentally. You're still pretty much taking a perpetual calendar and having to stick on it that mechanical Memovox alarm function. But it's great to see how they were able to do this. I believe one of the ways they're doing this too is with, there's probably a couple holes for pushers on this case. Well, now, remember we started with that 60th anniversary pink gold Reverso. What a gorgeous watch. And again, that was in 1991. Well, 10 years later, in 2001, it's already time to do the 70th anniversary of the Reverso. And look what JLC did this time. Again, man, they're just knocking it out of the park. Love this watch. This is the first time using the extra Grand, Tau case. So it's a bit bigger, 12 millimeters thick, 46 millimeters tall, 29 millimeters wide. This is a caliber 879. What's great about this caliber is, again, you have power reserve in the top left, day-night indicator in the top right. Now you have a big date function, though, right at the bottom left, right around 7 p.m., sub-seconds on the right. And then you flip it over and you get to see it's just a display back, and you just can really appreciate the manual wound double barrel movement. And what's interesting about this too is, look at that scale. This movement is a 10-day movement, and this is 8 days here in my notes. Maybe it is 8 days. I think, yes, it is 8 day. I'll tell you though, I've heard people say with this particular movement that they've been able to get a lot more time out of it than just 8 days too. Like JLC was conservative with this, which I think is pretty cool. And what's great is they took this exact movement and put it in a regular Reverso. So you can just it's called the Grand Date Reverso. They made it for years. And, if you want a more accessible version in stainless steel, you absolutely can. What's interesting is it kind of is a combination of these two. Obviously, what you're seeing here on the right is a platinum case, but then it has that really pretty dark gray dial. And on the other one, which is, gold, that one has that nice kind of white frosted dial. Where if you get the stainless steel one, it's kind of like you're combining those. It looks like the platinum case, but it's stainless steel, but it has that white dial. In my book, though, it's not platinum, it's white gold. In my book, the white gold one's where it's at, though. Just look at it zoomed in here for a moment and just appreciate it. I love the flat gray. I like the guilloche in the middle of the dial. I love the Art Nouveau numerals. You have the applied JLC logo at the top at 12. Maybe it's a little heavy-handed that then they're also spelling out Jaeger-LeCoultre in the sub-dial for seconds. I don't care. And also that it says Reverso. Still don't care. And this really is a fantastic movement. Maybe the last aside I'll do with this one is, and I wonder if anyone else remembers this. If you've been in watches for a long time, you might. But Jaeger-LeCoultre, has always had a website presence, and they had the funnest game where you could put together this exact movement, and it was actually a tough game. Like you had to put the pieces in order, and I don't think you were putting all 200 pieces together. You're probably putting together 20 or 30 or 40 pieces. I can't remember, and it would kind of time you. And I loved playing it. It was only maybe it was only available to people in their owners club. I can't remember, but I used to play it all the time, and I just really enjoyed it. And it was hard. I really wish watch brands would do more things like that because it was like engaging. You also learned a little bit about watchmaking, and even if you didn't learn about watchmaking, you still got appreciation because you're like, wow, there's a lot of parts in these. And again, yeah, this is just so pretty. I love that gray dial. Now let's talk about a few other things kind of going on at this time. Check out these 4 watches. I think, again, at this time, watch brands were, and maybe probably not all watch brands, Rolex is not doing this, but the importer for JLC watches in Portugal wanted to do something special to maybe highlight and help promote some local Portuguese artists. And so they came up with the idea of doing an art watch each year for 4 years. And I know I use the word endearing a lot, but that's exactly what these are. And all of them have different themes around time. And so you look at the top left, and that's kind of the standard JLC with the pointer date. And I think it has a month window. I've always liked that movement. And it has the tortoise and the hare on the back. Great kind of proverb story that came out in 2000. In 2001, you can see this one where it's a black dial, has the artist's signature in red, just below Jaeger-LeCoultre, and then you flip it over and you see this beautiful enameled work or lacquer work, and then the spiral thinking about time, right, and the circular nature of time. And then in 2002, here you have Paulo Rego. This was an LE of 40 pieces, and apparently there's a story about this woman and a pelican. There's a time element to that as well. Really pretty. And then 2004, this one with the snake on the back. And I always thought this case was so interesting because this was the sport case, for those who remember these. And traditionally, you always saw these with bracelets, and it's so interesting to see it with a leather strap. I mean, it definitely gives off a strong Swatch vibe to me, but I think these are a lot of fun. These are super hard to find, but I just thought it was worth sharing these. And apparently, there was quite a few people who got into these, because these are all 4 of these names are not household names, at least for me as a Westerner in the United States. But I think what is interesting is that, for local people involved in the arts or collectors in Portugal, these really resonated. And so they also made a fitted box because apparently a lot of people bought all 4. And so, yeah, you bought all 4, you probably got a free wooden box. Can't beat that. The last maybe series we can talk about that was also going on this time, especially later in the 2000s, ushering in the new millennia, this is on the heels of that wonderful 70th anniversary Reverso, is you're really going to now start to see JLC take some, I won't call them risks, but really continue to push the envelope of what can a Reverso mean and what can a Reverso look like. And so here you have the platinum. They called this the number 1 limited series of 500 platinum case. But this is the first time you're seeing it skeletonized on the front and the back in the same watch. And look at the cabochon sapphire in the crown, kind of like a la Cartier, and just all of the handwork in the engraving of the skeletonized movement. And I love the JLC kind of enameled logo that you can see there on the back of the movement, and I think is what is the mainspring gearing and housing. Really, really pretty. 2003, they wanted to honor one of the founders of JLC, Jaeger-LeCoultre. Here you have a Master 8-Day in platinum. Again, that big power reserve up in the top left, day-night indicator in the top right, big date, and then sub-seconds. The power reserve bridge on this had a display back. It was signed with kind of a facsimile of Jaeger-LeCoultre's signature. Nice size, 41.5 millimeters diameter. I just think this is, from the front, it doesn't look anything special, right? And this is also kind of the first time you're seeing, it's a platinum watch in a round case, but they're not using that special kind of bluish gray dial. They're using a silver dial in this case, but it absolutely is a special watch. 2004, now we have the Reverso Platinum number 2, but the number 1 was that, really heavy skeletonized Reverso. Now you have a Reverso where now they've brought back the idea of a tourbillon. You can see they've reworked the movement a little bit. In this case, now you see there's a power reserve on the front. Remember on that earlier tourbillon Reverso, the power reserve was actually on the display back where you can see the tourbillon. I still love that there's no cutout for the tourbillon on the front of the dial. Makes it really super stealth, in my opinion. You just have the sub-seconds and it just says tourbillon. It's only when you flip it over do you see it. Again, you see that cool cutout in the case. You can see the whole tourbillon cage. Really nice. I love the addition again of the power reserve, and they just did a little bit more cutouts on the movement in the gear train. And I love these where they're doing that gray dial. In 2004, we have the Reverso Platinum Tourbillon Squelette. And here, again, notice that sapphire's back. Notice that the case is skeletonized. However, now it's like they've kind of coupled the last two watches we saw together, because now it's skeletonized and it has a tourbillon, that 1 minute tourbillon. And because of that, and because you can see it on the front and the back, notice they've cut out the notch in the bottom on the front, on the dial side, so you can still appreciate that whole tourbillon cage. And you can still have your hours and minutes, as you can see, and there's still sub-seconds there as well. So it's pretty cool to see kind of both of these married together. Again, this is a super limited edition of just 35 watches. This was in 2004. Not a cheap watch, as you can imagine, being platinum, skeletonized, tourbillon. A lot of things going on there. I wanted to call out just a few of the other limited editions that were going on. I don't think any of these really require a whole lot, because they really are pretty much exactly the same as existing models. Just all of them were for different things. In this case, special series for the Hourglass retailer, JLC retailer in Singapore. And then one of these was for Tourneau, another large retailer. And you can see the 8-day was, a series of 88. The dual time was a series of 120. Just, interesting side note that during this time, and even probably still now, JLC does do some limited edition or limited series for special retailers. At this time, there was this guy popped up, the Master Control 8 Days Black Dial, limited series of 50, comes in a lovely wooden box again. But it's interesting that it's a steel case, transparent case back. I don't know a lot about this watch. I haven't been able to find out a lot about it, but it is a limited series of just 50. Just weird to me that it's in steel, really pretty black dial. I don't know. I'd love to find out more on this one. This is kind of my one of my current mystery watches. But I do think this movement and this dial layout in the round case, I think, is really well balanced, and I just love the really big sword hands that you see here for the power reserve, the sub-seconds, and the hours and minutes. And now, one of my favorite reversos, the Grand Wimpy, limited edition of 100 from 2005. What's special about this watch? Well, one, I love the German that's on the dial. I think that's really cool. Flip it over, though, and check out. I think this is really one of the very first reversos with a rotor, automatic winding. So it's pretty thick, 12 millimeters. I love it has a day-night indicator at 12 o'clock on the front of the dial. And you can see it's, again, celebrating 100 years of Wimpy. Sub-seconds down there. I think this is a great watch, stainless steel. There was 100 of these made. Personally, I'd love to track one down for myself. Just because I love reversos. I love that it has the very standard numerals. But I also like the idea of the automatic winding. And I really like how they did that cutout. There's a lot of different ways they could have done that. Just like you've seen the display backs on other reversos where it's rectangular, here they've scalloped the top and the bottom to perfectly match the curve of the rotor. You notice that? Really cool touch. This was 2005. We're jumping around a little bit in time just because then the next couple watches I wanted to share as we close out this kind of first part is, these are so bonkers that I wanted to save them till the end. So in 2004, you have the first horological excellence, the Giro Tourbillon 1, limited series of 75. You can tell immediately that this is something really special. This particular watch, semi-skeletonized movement, right? You can see the movement through in that little, where the hours and minutes are in the kind of sub dial. It's really not sub dial; it is the dial, but it's taking up just this top half of the main watch case. But then, do you notice off to the sides? It's glass and it's frosted, so you can see through it a little bit to see more of the mechanics. And then you can see that long retrograde arch, which is the pointer date from 1 to 31 and how it gets to 31 and then shoots back. And of course, you can't miss the huge multi-axis spherical tourbillon cage at 6 o'clock. So interesting. This is a perpetual calendar. It does have an 8-day power reserve. Has a running equation of time. That's what one of those hands are. The other was the reserve to the March, the power reserve. I had to show the back of this watch because it's so clean on the front. You're like, how is this a perpetual calendar, Troy? Well, flip it over to the back and look, you can just see that long hand for the leap year indicator, the 1, 2, 3B. And then you can see the month. See how it goes J and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, D. That's because instead of 1, they put J for January, and D is December for 12. Interesting, right? They made 75 of these, but the original price, $340,000. I really cannot think of another watch with a higher jewel count. My research was showing this had 117 jewels. When was the last time you heard of a watch with over 100 jewels in it? 659 parts. I'm sure I can't even afford a service on a watch like this. But boy, am I glad that something like this exists in the world. And this was done in 2004. In 2005, they did another Antoine Lecoultre kind of limited series in honor of piece. Again, his signature is on the bridge in the back. Here, I've added a picture. You can kind of see it in the bottom right, the signature on that really pretty, kind of flared out, movement finishing. To me, it almost looks like a seashell, how it's kind of radiating out, or almost like sun rays. right, kind of emanating from um, the balance spring. Interesting about this watch, uh, you know, do pay note to the flange up at the top. That obviously tells you that this is a minute repeater, which it is. I think this is also probably a Grand Sonnier. You can see on the bottom right where you can kind of choose between how you want it to sound or chime. Um, Big power reserve, 15 days for this guy. And then you can see it's even showing I think it's like the milli-Newton meters of the spring torque of the movement. Maybe that's important for having it chime or for the accuracy of the time. But yeah, just really, really cool watch. 44 millimeters, big watch. Again, not cheap. $245,000. And this takes us up to 2005. That's a lot of watches. And in closing, I have to say again, I was really hoping to almost do one presentation that would include everything, but you realize so quickly that there's really too much. And as you can imagine too, after watches like this, and as our hobby in the watch industry has continued to grow, that Jaeger-LeCoultre continue to put out even more limited editions at almost a faster rate. So at some point, I'll get around to doing part two, maybe starting right where we left off at 2005 and going forward. Obviously, as a teaser, I put a watch I've owned for a while, which is the Tribute to Polaris 1965, maybe it's 68, I can't remember now. Memovox, gorgeous watch. That's just kind of a teaser for the watches that would be coming, because there's so many great ones. I think of like the Geophysique Tribute watch that came out. Again, you see even more of the like Hybris Mechanica stuff starts coming out later. So a lot of great stuff to cover in the future. In closing, I hope you've really enjoyed this episode of the Grumpy Collector podcast. I have such a deep respect and fondness for Jaeger-LeCoultre watches, the brand, the history, and again, I just want to encourage collectors when we think of, I see so many people get upset that they can't get the Patek Philippe watch they want or the steel sports Rolex watch they want. And I would just encourage you, if you're willing to dig just underneath the surface, go through the back catalogs of Antiquorum or, Phillips or Sotheby's. There are tons of wonderful watches out there that instead of paying 3 times retail for them, you could probably pay half of retail for them and get so much more watch for the money. So that's my public service announcement on that. Anyways, look for this presentation. If you're listening to this just audio only, look for this presentation with the slides in PDF format at thegrumpycollector.com on the show notes page. Again, for the Grumpy Collector podcast. And again, I'm Troy. You can find me on Instagram anytime at the Grumpy Collector. And feel free to email me at hitroy@gmail.com. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.